All right, so welcome to the Internet of Water P2P Network webinar series. Today we have a presentation about the Respect the Shenandoah campaign and how community science monitoring data is helping to enact the Shenandoah Watershed Compact, a shared vision for a clean, healthy river. So my name is Lucas Stevens. I'm a water policy associate at the Internet of Water, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. In just a minute, I'll turn it over to our presenters, John Dawes, Executive Director of the Commons, and Mark Frondorf, the Shenandoah Riverkeeper. They will be talking about their efforts to support the Respect the Shenandoah campaign with real-time monitoring data. This webinar is the second in our current mini-series that focuses on the theme of community science water data. Last month, John walked us through the Commons Water Reporter software and showcased some of its technical capabilities. If you missed it, you can find the recording of that webinar on the events page of our website. So this month, we'll get to see Water Reporter in action on the river in support of a monitoring program and water quality advocacy campaign. Next month, in November, we'll have an interlude to our series to hear about stream gauges in Montana. And then in December, we'll have a longer joint presentation about our freshwater harmful algal bloom monitoring project, which aligns and connects monitoring data collected by community science groups and tribal governments with the state of California's FHAD database and warning system. So in that presentation, you'll get sort of a look under the hood at how one of these collaborative projects is developed. All right, so before I turn it over, just a couple of housekeeping details. We are recording the webinar today. So if you have to leave early or if your connection gets broken or something and you miss part of the presentation, you'll be able to find it on our website as soon as we get it up. And we'll have the presentation slides up there as well. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a couple of time for questions and answers. So feel free at any time while you have a question during the presentation or afterwards to put it into the Q&A box. And then I'll read them out and moderate the discussion following the presentation. If you have any administrative issues, like if the video cuts out or if the audio is not working, you can put these in the chat box and we'll try to get those fixed during the presentation. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to John and Mark.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Lucas. And yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to present again to the Internet of Water peer-to-peer network. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen quickly just to pull up the presentation. And yeah, Lucas, if it's okay with you, if you could just let me know if you can see my screen here.
That looks good, yeah.
Awesome. So just to kick it off, my name is John Dawes. I'm the Executive Director of the Commons. We are part of a nonprofit organization that supports environmentally focused organizations with really robust software development tools focused on data management and water quality improvement. Really fortunate to have one of our key project partners here, Mark Frondorf, who's your Shenandoah Riverkeeper, who's really spearheaded a number of the policies related to the Respect the Shenandoah campaign and the Shenandoah Compact. And I'll let Mark introduce himself here in a second, but also wanted to give a quick shout out to our other project partner, Bill Howard, who's with the Downstream Project, and really focuses on supporting us with making connections with small watershed organizations and groups throughout the Shenandoah Valley and getting our tools like Water Reporter integrated into their program areas. So Mark, if you could just quickly introduce yourself, that'd be awesome. And then we can run through the agenda.
Sure, John, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and to share what we are doing out here in the Shenandoah Valley. I've been the Shenandoah Riverkeeper since early 2015 and have worked with Bill the last few years at Downstream Project, and really Bill was instrumental in linking John and I together and talking about the tool that exists in the Water Reporter and what it's doing for us out here in the Valley real time to improve water quality in the watershed.
Awesome. And then lastly, and certainly not least, the Commons and the work that we do really wouldn't be made possible without the support of Water Data Collaborative. We're really fortunate to be able to build sort of this large community network of community science organizations, and just also wanted to voice our appreciation for support there. So just in terms of a layout of what we'll be walking you through today, basically, Mark is going to provide a pretty in-depth walkthrough of some of the water quality challenges in the Shenandoah, specifically around harmful algal blooms in the Shenandoah. We'll talk a bit about the Shenandoah Compact, which is really a joint effort and a multi-stakeholder effort in really coordinating a strategic vision toward improving the Shenandoah River watershed. And then also we'll take an in-depth walkthrough of our platform water reporters' role in supporting these community science efforts in terms of allowing any community scientists and volunteer to sort of be the eyes and the ears of the Shenandoah River. We'll provide sort of a live walkthrough of that work, and then make sure that we've got time for questions and answers as we go as well. So Mark, I will queue up for water quality issues in the Shenandoah.
Sure. Thanks for that, John. If you can just hit the next slide. But essentially, we have been working on algal issues since 2004, 2005, really before the Shenandoah Riverkeeper organization had existed. It was just embedded as part of the Potomac Riverkeeper work in the watershed. 2004, 2005, there was a major fish kill in the Shenandoah River. It killed about 90% of the black bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and sunfish. And at that point, the governor stood up a fish kill task force, and they began to seriously look at the role that algae possibly could have been playing. They never found a smoking gun. There was never a single cause that identified it, but the algae was thought to be such that either there were possible harmful algal blooms going on, or hypoxia happening, and just an absence of oxygen in the water that was contributing to the fish kill. And then so at that point, we started seriously investigating it. And between 2010 and 2016, we started actively trying to get all three reaches of the Shenandoah River, that's the North Fork, South Fork, and the main stem of the river, put on the EPA's impaired waters list for excessive algae or nutrient overload. And each time we went through this cycle and this iteration, quite honestly, we failed. The first time Virginia DEQ came back and they said, hey, listen, we understand that there are issues in the river, but Virginia has no numeric nutrient limits for free flowing streams. And so that we have nothing to judge it by. And so the next iteration, we came back and we submitted approximately 200 letters from fishing guides and anglers and B&B owners and hikers and birders, saying that their use and their impairment of the river is being impaired as a result of these heavy algal blooms. And under the Clean Water Act, water quality standards can be developed either through numeric nutrient limits or narrative standards. DEQ came back on that iteration and said, whoa, numeric or narrative standards are just way too subjective, way too hard. And there's nothing that we can really do about that. It's just gonna be too difficult. And so in 2017, we decided to go to court, and we sued in federal district court, sued the EPA for accepting the impaired waters list without having the Shenandoah watershed put on it. We lost. We appealed in the appellate court. We lost again, and that took place right when the ruling came down on that, right when the pandemic started blowing up. But in the interim, if we were going to lose on anything, I would have preferred to lose in court, because even though we lost, it in my opinion, it compelled DEQ to stand up the Shenandoah algae methodology study, which was an attempt to start taking a serious look at what's going on in the river system. And so at that point, they started looking at it. And then going on sort of on a parallel track with that, we received a grant from Chesapeake Trust and started developing a vision and a roadmap to protect the Shenandoah watershed for future generations. And we brought in stakeholder community groups, from fishing guides and tourism bureaus to state and local government to agricultural community. And we all took a collective look as to what each of the stakeholder communities could have done or could do to preserve and protect the watershed. That came out in early 2020, in the winter of 2020, looking at that. And from that, the Watershed Compact, the Shenandoah Compact, that was the genesis for our Respect the Shenandoah campaign. And I also just want to mention too, that also going on with that, we were instrumental in getting House Bill 1422 passed into public law, which calls for all cattle to be removed from Virginia rivers and perennial streams by the end of 2025. And so all of this is going on. And when the Respect the Shenandoah campaign came out, that was through the hard work of Bill Howard and walking us through how we could actually use the water reporter and John here to develop it and expand the eyes and ears in our community. And so we started identifying, algal issues up and down all three reaches of the watershed. And in the fall of last year, David Paler, the director of DEQ, he announced that Virginia DEQ is going to construct numeric nutrient limits for the Shenandoah River. And initially that was supposed to come out at the end of last year. It got pushed and kicked a little bit, and then it was folded into Virginia's triennial review. And they decided that they would use chlorophyll A as the metric, and that it would focus on filamentous algae for its impact on recreational impairment, fishing, canoeing, paddling, tubing. And so we thought that it was good. It wasn't great, but it was a good first step. And we continued to submit algal bloom complaints to both Virginia DEQ and also to Virginia Department of Health. And so fast forward to this summer, early July, the river has been in near drought conditions from the middle of June through the end of through the end of August, beginning of September, until Hurricane Ida came. And we submitted complaints, as the slide shows, on July 7th, additional complaints on July 14th, and then on July 23rd, Virginia Department of Health issues the first ever harmful algal bloom advisory on the Shenandoah River system. And so a lot of people, it caught a lot of attention, and it got picked up by press and everything else. But in a weird way, I'm kind of happy that it happened, because this is not the first time that there's been a harmful algal bloom on the river system. It's just simply the first time that the Commonwealth has acknowledged it and issued an advisory to address it. And it would not have happened without the use of Water Reporter and the submission of our algal bloom complaints on the 7th of July, on the 14th of July, and for the previous 2 or 3 years. And it's compelling DEQ and Virginia Department of Health to take a serious look at it. And I also want to acknowledge that DEQ and Virginia Department of Health, they bent over backwards to do what they could to investigate this and to look at this. It started out being roughly a 10-mile segment. And then as they went upstream on the North Fork of the Shenandoah, they realized that these algal mats went all the way up to Edinburgh, Virginia. And there were no monies available to conduct the testing and conduct the analysis. And so both DEQ and Virginia Department of Health were jumping through hoops to try to make it happen. They were trying to be good stewards of our resource, and the funding and the budget and the money simply was not there. And so that's where we're really sort of focusing our efforts on addressing this in the future. But none of this would have happened without our systematic submission of algal bloom complaints through the use of Water Reporter.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. And again, really appreciate sort of like the very deep in detail history of sort of getting from algal bloom observation to really catalyzing respective action in the Shenandoah watershed. And in terms of this portion of the presentation, just kind of want to add to Mark's story and sort of sharing how the respective Water Reporter platform and technology goes about supporting this effort. And with a little bit of context, so for those of you who are not on our previous webinar last month, I'll just give kind of a quick deep dive of Water Reporter and its feature sets. So this system is really utilized a platform approach to collect community science observations. And the example that we have, in the Shenandoah River watershed is really tied to communities being able to observe specific issues related to their watershed. We collect data really in two separate areas. So our first is with observational monitoring. This is done through Water Reporter's mobile application, where you can download it for your Apple, for your iPhone or an Android device. And this actually empowers users to collect data related to an observation that they see in the field. So right off the bat, a user can actually collect a specific location, add comments, as well as an image. And then our system will actually collect the watershed name, as well as submit a number of notifications to different administrative users, such as Mark and his team at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. In the case of the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, we actually supported PRKN with the mobile application, and really is sort of a very simple workflow in terms of users in their community science group going out, downloading the application, and then when they float on the river, if they see a harmful algal bloom or a specific issue of concern, they're able to take a photo, it's geo-referenced, and then they add a hashtag, Respect the Shenandoah. And that hashtag actually allows those data to be added to a live map. And those data are then stored directly in the Water Reporter database, where it can be utilized for a number of different mapping applications, as well as fueling reports to Virginia DEQ and DOH, as Mark had shared. And actually, I'm going to just quickly share just kind of a quick example. So in the case of using the mobile application, Water Reporter makes it really, really simple. So if a user is in the field and they see a specific harmful algal bloom, that volunteer, has the mobile app on their device, and they collect a number of fields. So take a photo, add comments in the description. Your phone will automatically geotag the report, and then that gets actually sent to the Water Reporter database and community. And what's really core about the Water Reporter platform is that it's empowered by an open API that powers a number of applications. And so where we are really passionate about this work is that this is sort of the intersection between the policies, technology, and the people. So as Mark has his respective needs for the different data and software, we're able to connect that to the API, and that in turn fuels a number of community notifications, sends those in the form of emails to different state representatives at DOH, as well as the Department of Health. And then that in turn can empower different issues related to the watershed. So whether that is harmful algal blooms in the context of surface water, or it's a public health risk, that can also inform things like the TMDL and the Shenandoah Compact. And then, hopefully those data can then inform actions that restore the Shenandoah to its natural state. So just as an example here, with Water Reporter, the mobile application allows data to be shared to Mark's team at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. So when a user is out in the field and they submit an observation, those data automatically get pushed to the Potomac Riverkeeper Network. And what's really neat is that inside Potomac Riverkeeper Network, we've actually created a number of embeddable maps and applications that make visualizing that data very simple. So what you're looking at here, which I think is really exciting, is a map of all the harmful algal blooms that have been submitted by community science members for the Respect the Shenandoah campaign. And it's pretty neat because if you kind of trace up and down the Shenandoah, you can actually see all of the places where those posts have been submitted. But where it's really, really valuable, I think, to decision makers are in two places. So one, this map is portable and it can be shared throughout the Potomac Riverkeeper Network website in the Respect the Shenandoah campaign webpage, whereas users automatically share their data, it shows up right on the map. But then also in the case of thinking about sort of the back end feature sets, these data can actually be exported out of Water Reporter and shared through a number of different applications. So as Mark and his team collect data from stakeholders, these data can be exported out into a machine readable file and then ported over to a number of different third-party applications. So if you're using things like ArcGIS Online, it's very simple and straightforward to spin up a map of all of the different observations and also share those with respective decision makers. So I think the real key component here is that our work with PRKN and the Water Reporter application is that these data can kind of set up a very large set of events related to the information that's being collected. So I don't know, Mark, if you have any other items to add there.
Yeah, the other thing that the other feature that I know a lot of our members use on the map, where it showed the algal bloom submission complaints, you also saw a handful of blue solid diamonds, and those are USGS water gauge listing points. And so we encourage our members to use it as sort of one-stop shopping if they're going to go fishing or tubing or floating with their family, to see if there have been any recent algal complaints submitted, as well as to get a read on what the river level is on the Shenandoah. And so, right now you can see, it's 2.5 feet at Luray. That's a great gauge. It's perfect to get out on the water. And so people and families and friends can safely, head out and get on the water, knowing that the gauge is in a safe, that the river is in a safe operating level. And then the other thing is that it just encourages our members to just get and take a look to see where all this is going on. And, just the visual image helps to tell the story as to what's going on in the river system.
Yeah, no, that's a great key. And I'll also add in too, one technical component of these USGS gauges. So what I'm really excited about is the infrastructure that we've developed with Water Reporter actually allows for integration of a lot of third-party data sets. So in the example Mark shared, right, like this USGS gauge, this is actually polling live from USGS monitoring sites, because they have a third-party API that's open and allows us to pull in those parameters and show them on a map in a series of trends. This is, in our opinion, a really, complementary strategy with Internet of Water of trying to interconnect these data sets and actually share them in a way that is useful to the end user. And these are a lot of different components that as we sort of work toward connecting these data sets, we have almost infinite numbers of outcomes that can happen as a result of building some of these applications and putting these data into use. So it's cool. So just as another item to add, so one of the really key components of the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, it is very focused on qualitative data and information, right? So this notion of, if you're out on the river, you see a specific issue related to a harmful algal bloom, or any respective water quality threat, being able to very quickly submit location, photo, comments, and anecdotal information. At Water Reporter, we're trying to really cover all of the different components of the water quality monitoring workflow across the board. And so as a result, we've actually worked to develop a number of data management modules that are focused on collecting quantitative water quality monitoring in the form of samples. So in the case of the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, we have a lot of really fantastic observations that are sort of one-off geolocations, all very important data, but then we're also following up with the ability to add recurring monitoring sites as well in the system. So in the case that a small watershed organization or really any volunteer monitoring group needed to log specific water quality monitoring samples, there's infrastructure in place that lets users collect a number of samples at a specific site. And what's really exciting about this work is that we can actually support a number of groups regionally, so that if a group has a water quality monitoring program or they need to partner, they're able to access sort of those same set of tools that sort of move toward that cumulative impact of monitoring their watershed. So in the case of our quantitative water quality sampling, these data can be put on the map exactly the same as the water quality observations related to the Respect the Shenandoah campaign, but they're also targeted at a number of parameters. So in Mark's example, where he shared the different monitoring applications for blue-green algae and a number of chemical and physical parameters, those can actually be assessed across the board at an array of monitoring sites. And what we support is, again, a specific monitoring station. And at that station, you can collect any number of samples regarding a parameter of interest. And just like the water quality monitoring data that's collected through these volunteer observations, those are also made instantly available through Water Reporter's API. And again, we shared this a bit at our last presentation, but just as another example, and for those of you who are joining for the first time this month, we've really tried to take off and support a number of third-party technologies for volunteer monitoring data. So, this is a really rough example, but Water Reporter's web application that I was showing just earlier with Potomac Riverkeeper Network, it also supports a number of specific monitoring data. So in the case that a user is monitoring data at a specific monitoring site, we've actually built the infrastructure so that any information that they're collecting really maps in a database to their specific vocabulary for their monitoring program. So, in this case, a monitoring station is a specific place that you're monitoring. And then inside that specific site with attributes and information, you can upload all of your respective samples and readings. And, we work with a number of groups to actually collect this quantitative information. And as it's collected, then it makes it really, really simple to put these monitoring sites and readings on a specific map. And so this is a related group in the Shenandoah. It's not specific to harmful algal blooms, but it gives you a sense for the different water quality monitoring data that are being collected. And again, at these monitoring sites, you can see the specific values and readings that are collected at that specific site. And so by getting all of these programs sort of standardized and pulled together in one place, we're able to sort of mix and match that specific data and support different policy initiatives. And then lastly, with our open API, the thought is that we can start to make these different relationships between specific monitoring stations. So if I'm out in the Shenandoah River watershed and there's a group that is monitoring for a specific parameter such as E. coli or harmful algal blooms, there might be a QR code on local signage, and I could scan that and then very quickly pull up a specific example where at that monitoring site, I'd know the exact specific readings for things like E. coli or blue-green algae or a specific parameter. So again, we're really focused on being able to connect these data with localized programs and also make sure that we're supporting those policy initiatives that are local to the Shenandoah River and other watersheds across the nation. So I'll pause and take a breath. I think we're pretty close to questions. I don't know, Mark, if you have any other items.
Yeah, the other thing that I would just jump in and add is Philip Musigas. He's our Potomac Riverkeeper Network in-house counsel, and he is fond of saying that we punch above our weight. And the reason that we can punch above our weight and that we can make such an impact upon protecting the Shenandoah and Potomac River is because of tools like this, and because of the water reporter. It's really a force multiplier. We are very savvy and very smart on environmental laws, and we're out there patrolling the river almost on a daily basis. But we are not IT professionals, and this allows us to focus and have a persistent stare on the river and allow people like John and Bill Howard to put this together and just to manage the data in a way that just makes a compelling argument that more needs to be done to protect this river system. And so, I mean, for a very small amount of money, it buys us so much. And so it really is just a force multiplier for us and allows us to, as Philip would say, to punch above our weight.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. Yeah, really appreciate that. I guess I'll turn it back to Lucas. I'm happy to open it up for any questions or discussion as well.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's really great to see sort of data put into action like this for substantive results. That's great. So to audience members, feel free to put your questions into the question and answer. I'll go ahead and get us started. So Mark, you laid out this this timeline over several years and several reporting cycles of the Virginia DEQ, where you were trying to get the Shenandoah River listed as impaired for algal blooms. Can you talk a little bit about why that was so important to you and what sort of like what that sort of starts in motion and why you were trying to do that?
Exactly. Yeah. The Clean Water Act allows, it's a federal law, but allows each of the states to implement the Clean Water Act. And part of that is that they have to submit an impaired waters list, water that is not healthy. And what that does when a piece of a stretch of water is put on that impaired waters list, it starts a clock, and it compels the state to develop a plan to do something about it, the TMDL, the total maximum daily load. And in the Shenandoah watershed, we have roughly 500,000 head of cattle, 160 to 180 million chickens, about 18 million turkeys. And all of that manure and poultry litter needs to go someplace. And so if it gets put on land that needs it, that there's an agronomic need for it, it's great. It's a cheap fertilizer. But if it's being put on already saturated land, especially poultry litter, and then the land can't hold on to that phosphorus, and because we have some steep sloped hills here in the valley, that just gets washed off, and it just starts this chain reaction for these algal blooms. And so if it was put on if the all three reaches of the Shenandoah were put on the impaired waters list, it would compel DEQ to begin to develop a TMDL and to start to systematically address how intensive agriculture operations in the valley are being handled and being addressed, and what they're going to do to ensure that the river does not continue to suffer from nitrogen and phosphorus overload. And so
does Virginia have nitrogen and phosphorus water quality standards?
No, the short answer is no, but we got David Paler, Director Paler, last fall to agree to start building numeric limits for nutrients, and then initially it was going to be nitrogen and phosphorus, and then they decided to opt with chlorophyll A as a stand-in for that. But it was going to be, and is currently just being focused on filamentous algae, the long seaweed algae, and its impact on recreational activities. And I thought that was a fine first step. But with this announcement of this harmful algal bloom that stretched 52.5 miles, that was a game changer. That was saying that humans were potentially at risk, livestock was potentially at risk, pets, the fish living in there, the benthic creatures in there, all at risk from a harmful algal bloom. And so now we are saying this is a game changer, and these nutrient limits, it shouldn't just focus on filamentous algae, but it also needs to capture blue-green algae, that is cyanobacteria, to ensure the health of the river going forward.
Oh, and Mark, I actually had just a follow-up item to add, like 303D listing, does that also provide greater leverage for support or funding to potentially restore an impaired waterway?
Yes, there is potential with EPA to get funding. The Chesapeake Bay Cleanup Program, that's a giant TMDL, and so, but it's really, in Virginia, agriculture is the golden goose. It generates roughly $90 billion. It's the #1 industry in Virginia by far, and so there's great reluctance to do anything to address some of these agricultural issues.
Do you see any progress in terms of this next reporting cycle? Do you expect that because of the respect to the Shenandoah, that it will be put on the impaired list in this next reporting cycle?
I would love to say yes, but I can't say that with a straight face. So,
and then I'm also wondering, so in terms of, this sort of quantitative sampling, John, that you were talking about that other groups are doing, is there nutrient sampling going on, and what other sort of parameters are relevant to the algal blooms that might be, integrated with the sort of data, the observational data that we were talking about here?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there are like groups like Friends of the Shenandoah River have done an excellent job maintaining a really long-standing baseline of water quality monitoring samples for nutrients. I'm not sure if they're doing blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. I know they are doing E. coli. But those are all data that are very easily brought online through a water reporter data service. And at the same time, as Mark had shared with these different state monitoring efforts coming online, we have really a really simple framework for bringing new data on the map right alongside the community-based observations. So whether the state would be bringing on a new piece of hardware like a sensor or collecting respective samples, that can all essentially be added to the map very easily and shared throughout the respective Shenandoah Compact network. So I think, like, in the case of the infrastructure, we've tried to build it so that as new data comes available, it's really easy to get that in the hands of different decision makers, and then also visualize it on a map to help inform different policy decisions.
And then, Lucas, if I could just jump in on that, what John was just talking about informing policymakers and decision makers. This 52.5-mile harmful algal bloom was implemented on the North Fork of the Shenandoah, and the two forks, the North Fork and the South Fork, the North Fork is probably the lesser of the two when it comes to recreational activity. Over on the South Fork of the Shenandoah, you have probably a dozen canoe liveries and outfitters putting people on the river on a daily basis. You have fishing guides, you have countless number of B&Bs and restaurants entirely dependent upon recreational activity taking place on the South Fork of the Shenandoah. And if that advisory would have been put in place on 52.5 miles of the South Fork of the Shenandoah River, it would have been a huge economic punch to the gut for the Shenandoah Valley. Agriculture obviously is extremely important, and I get that and I understand that, but tourism dollars in the Shenandoah Valley are equally as important. And fall foliage is a wonderful thing, but it lasts 2 or 3 weeks. But getting people on the river is a March to late October season. And it's just incredibly important, not just to the outfitters, but to restaurants and hotels and inns and everybody else up and down the valley.
Yeah, thanks. And then the thing about like integrating data, I wonder, you were talking about those USGS stream gauges. And do you find stream flow is also useful to your monitoring efforts? I mean, you were talking about with the drought was at the simultaneous to the algal bloom.
Right.
Do you try to incorporate that into your workflow at all?
Yes, we do. We monitor it very, very closely. If I could, I'm just looking for a slide here real fast. If I could, can I share screen? Is that okay? Or
yeah,
go for it.
Yeah. This is the North Fork of the Shenandoah at the USGS site at Strasburg, where the initial harmful algal bloom advisory took place. And so roughly from the middle of June to roughly the middle of September, the stream flow was below the 96-year medium daily statistic average of the river. And so for harmful algal blooms to occur, you need 3 things. You need lots of nutrients, which we have from poultry litter. You need warm water temperatures, what we have because it's the middle of summer in Virginia. And then you need low flow with residence time. And so all 3 of these things are right here in that window from the middle of June through the beginning of September. And it wasn't until that peak there at the beginning of September, that's when Hurricane Ida blew up the valley. And, we went from, 100 CFS, which is nothing at the Strasburg gauge. It jumps to, this is a logarithmic, scale that we're looking at here. It jumps from, less than 100 to 9,000. And so we obviously track CFS, not just river levels itself, but also CFS, because CFS really tells you the story of the volume of water coming down the river. And when you see that, those levels start dropping below that historic average, we need to start paying attention. And even if we're able to get a handle on nutrient limits on nitrogen and phosphorus, I believe that we're going to see more harmful algal bloom advisories because climate change is manifesting itself in the Chesapeake Mid-Atlantic region with kind of wet springs and then borderline drought conditions in the summer, punctuated by very intense, strong storms. And that's exactly what we saw this season. And so it's imperative to track CFS and to follow that very closely.
Great, thanks. And it's good to see that Water Reporter enables that sort of integration from the USGS monitors. So one more question. Mark, can you talk a little bit about how Water Reporter has helped or changed or altered your relationship with Virginia DEQ?
Yeah, I mean, I think that before we used Water Reporter, we would submit complaints, they were more anecdotal. They were more catch as catch can. And through the use of Water Reporter and sort of standardizing the information and sending it to the Shenandoah Valley Regional Office, Tara Wyrick, I think it gives them a better picture of what's actually going on, and it expands their eyes and ears as well, to have this information. They're overworked, understaffed, stretched on resource dollars. I get all that, but it has allowed us to make a much stronger argument using Water Reporter.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate this. I don't see any more questions coming in. So one of you guys, the last chance to say, where people can find you if they want to support this effort. And any last final words for our audience?
Well, I'll let John have the words. I thank you very much for being on the call and for listening. This is a very important issue. Harmful algal blooms. Right now, it's in the Shenandoah Valley. It can very easily be in other watersheds and other river systems, next season. And it's important to get a handle on what tools we can use to address this in the policy realm. And I'm at Mark at ShenandoahRiverkeeper.org. You can do a web search for Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and thank you very much for having me.
Great. Yeah, and just to follow up on that, again, really appreciate the opportunity to share these examples and this work. For more information on how Water Reporter can support your community science organization, waterreporter.org or chesapeakecommons.org/waterreporter. You can also reach me at dawes@chesapeakecommons.org. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Lucas, and looking forward to next steps.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And just as a reminder, sign up for our Internet of Water P2P network. We'll get updates about our upcoming webinars and hear about all sorts of news surrounding water data throughout the country. Okay, with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you next month.